I can't wait for this year's gala. We're welcoming pianist Lang Lang, one of classical music's superstars. He's internationally recognized for his glamorous style and dynamic interaction with audiences. We'll be celebrating Valentines in Verona with music by Bartok and selections from Romeo and Juliet by both Berlioz and Prokofiev. Like much of his music, Bartok's second piano concerto is based on Central European folk music, especially that of Bartok's native Hungary. For much of his life, Bartok was considered an uncompromising modernist and a specialist, not a mainstream concert composer. That only really changed with the concerto for orchestra that he wrote at the end of his life in 1945. The first piano concerto is infamously fierce and difficult. With the second, Bartok wanted something more pleasing to audiences. Now, this is slightly amusing, and it reminds me of a story about Wagner. Wagner thought that Tristan and Isolde was a light work, which would have great box office appeal compared to his other operas. If any of you know Tristan, it's of course a very serious work, and there's something quite funny about Bartok considering the second, which is incredibly rhythmically and harmonically complex, easy to listen to. But much of the music has an irrepressible feeling of joy. The first movement starts with a fanfare-like trill in the piano and a folk dance in the trumpet and woodwinds. There's an air of celebration despite the music's complexity. The second movement is a vast, slow chorale, like a hymn tune, beginning in muted strings. The music is very mysterious. This is a mood in Bartok that we often call the night music. It sounds as if we're hearing things creeping along the ground at night when the insects come out. I once visited Bartok's house in Budapest, and I was fascinated by a display that he had above his piano. In a glass case, he had hundreds of insects, creepy crawlies, spiders, all sorts of things pinned through the middle to the wall, and he would look at these as he was composing. It explains a lot about the strange sounds that we hear in the second movement. The piano only begins to play about 3 minutes in a haunting duet with the timpani. This music has a frightening, foreboding quality. The third movement begins with a dramatic stroke from the bass drum and the solo piano responding by an alarming run up the keyboard. The timpani get faster and faster, and we're thrust into a movement characterized by a syncopated figure in the piano, alternating with yet another folk dance. The concerto ends with the piano again in a feeling of celebration, that same feeling from the first movement, bringing the piece to a thrilling close. We'll be surrounding the Bartok by two composers' takes on Shakespeare's tragedy of two star-crossed lovers, Romeo and Juliet. We'll play you one scene for orchestra, entitled Romeo Alone and Festivities with the Capulets. It starts with a lengthy, slow introduction. Romeo is by himself, and we can imagine him pining for his beloved Juliet. The music begins with solo strings that sounds very much like the beginning of Wagner's opera Tristan and Isolde. There's an oboe theme full of tenderness and longing as Romeo imagines his beloved. But eventually sounds of a distant ball drift across the orchestra. Romeo is enticed to go to the party. He's caught up in the whirl and spin of a very grand ball. But at the height of the festivities, a lonely theme reappears, and it's Juliet's theme, reminding us of what's happening in Romeo's mind. First of all, we'll be playing you a suite drawn from Prokofiev's ballet. Many of you will recognize some of the famous movements. You'll hear the pomposity of guests arriving at a glamorous ball in a heavy-handed and sarcastic minuet. You'll hear the terrifying music which accompanies Tybalt as he fights with Mercutio. There's incredible virtuosity as the violins play a seemingly unending string of very fast notes up and down their instruments, imitating the hectic, breathless panic as the two young men fight in a duel. Then we'll have the famous Montagues and Capulets music, representing the two warring families. And of course, the haunting music as we see Romeo at Juliet's tomb before he joins her in death. So I hope you'll join us for this gala, Valentines in Verona, as we hear music by two different composers setting Romeo and Juliet and welcome the fantastic and charismatic Lang Lang in Bartok's second piano concerto.